Call the member for Kellyville.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. From the outset, can I extend my sympathies and condolences to all members of our Jewish Australian community. We are currently addressing the terrorism and other amendments legislation, as you would be well aware, but I will be placing further words on Hansard in relation to my respect for that community and the dreadful attack on them through the loss of 15 lives only 8 years ago. Mr Speaker, there is no doubt that Australia is the greatest country in the world and New South Wales is the beating heart of our country's success, but our once peaceful demeanour is currently under threat. People in this country enjoy great freedoms and opportunities, and we, as their lawmakers of New South Wales, must ensure that our laws are effective and appropriate on behalf of the majority of our population, and particularly provide protections from danger for all our communities. But as lawmakers, we must act when action is required, and when threats are present, we cannot be found wanting, lest we end up on the wrong side of history. No person in this country, or indeed New South Wales, should ever live with the threat to their lives or their family lives. But sadly, the Jewish Australian community live with that threat each and every day. And that threat is imposed on them by radical Islamist extremists who have a completely incorrect and distorted perception of their own faith. Their hatred and vile actions grow like a cancer in our community, sending the very worst message to young members of their own communities, and they must be excised. I state for the record that I am not here condemning Muslims, of which I have many friends, but within our society there exist Islamic radical extremists with one intention, and that is to completely destroy every Jewish Australian in this country, and that is a fact. In terms of being on the wrong side of history, I make this point. The Shadow Attorney General for the Liberal Party, Liberal and National Coalition, earlier this year introduced various pieces of legislation aimed at implementing strong laws and provisions to combat the increased violence and social unrest that has plagued our society, especially since October the 7th. The rise of anti-Semitic violence in our state, and particularly in the Bondi area, escalated significantly following the events that occurred in Israel in 2023. The Liberals and Nationals opposition have remained committed to introducing into Parliament appropriate laws, some with mandated sentences, to address the incitement of violence and hatred towards Jewish Australians in our society. Every piece of legislation the Liberal Nationals have introduced to address anti-Semitism has been voted down, and today we have seen exactly the same thing. This is a rapidly drafted and flawed piece of legislation by the Minns government, and there is not one mention of the word anti-Semitism in this bill before the Parliament. I ask, Mr Speaker, how do you address the biggest threat to the Jewish Australian community if it is not even mentioned within this bill? Contained within the Liberal National Bill, which we wanted to debate today, there were amendments to the Crimes Amendment Display of Nazi Terrorist Symbols Bill 2025, which would address the gap in current New South Wales law by extending existing offences beyond Nazi symbols to cover a broader range of extremist and terrorist symbols, would target the use of symbols that are deployed to intimidate communities, glorify violence and normalise extremist ideologies, and also strengthen penalties to reflect the seriousness of the conduct, including higher 5-year maximum penalties in the district court, not the local court jurisdiction, and the introduction of a standard 1.5-year imprisonment non-parole period. We would also address, within the Summary Offences Amendment Public Assemblies Bill, which would introduce measures to address repeat protests, the deliberate shielding of identity of protesters, and the recovery of policing costs. That would also preserve the right to lawful protest while discouraging conduct that imposes unreasonable costs or disruption on the wider community. However, within this Minns government bill, the Minister for Police will make the call on what is referred to as a terrorist event, remembering that only twice in the history of this country has that occurred, once in the Links Cafe in 2016 and the other in Bondi 8 days ago. And excuse me, Mr Speaker, if I sound cynical, but the Minister for Police who introduced this legislation today talked about leadership. The Minister for Police will make a call on whether a terrorist event is evident. This is the Minister for Police who can't even stop a bunch of people in canoes from blocking a coal ship in Newcastle Harbour right next door to our own electorate. So you place pretty little faith in the Minister for Police standing up and defending and being the saviour of Jewish Australians. The Liberals and Nationals have addressed the serious scourge and continual rise in hateful racism and anti-Semitism with strong proposed laws, but we have been shouted down and ridiculed by the Labor Party, the Greens and independent members of this Parliament each and every time, including today. And by not addressing and weeding out the root cause of hatred towards the Jewish Australian community in New South Wales, the violence on our streets, the car bombings, the burning of Jewish preschools, the growth in despicable Nazi symbols, illegal protests at the Opera House where the Jewish community were asked not to attend, the neo-Nazi protest at the front of this very Parliament promoting one of the most offensive symbols of affront to humanity ever witnessed in the history of the world, and particularly citing the Holocaust in World War II where 6 million Jews were exterminated, have all gone unaddressed and unpunished because there are no serious punishments, laws or restrictions which have been directed to the radical Islamist extremists who perpetrate these crimes. Quite the contrary, the lack of action from the Minns government has resulted in the continual rise in anti-Semitism, culminating with the subsequent murder of 15 innocent lives at Bondi Beach just 8 days ago. This is where real leadership is required, but today the Liberal Nationals coalition have once again been denied the opportunity to introduce our own bill, a tough bill that provides minimum jail sentences and real protections for Jewish Australians and also our other communities. Within this Minns Labor government legislation, there will be a limit of 4 guns per person. While I'm not a supporter of anyone having guns, apart from those farmers in rural areas which use them to control feral pests and put down stock that are suffering, those people who shoot at targets and professional shooters controlling press, do we really believe in restricting the amount of guns farmers have access to a total of 4 will prevent another terrorist attack in our city? I put this to the House, Mr Speaker, that I don't believe anyone should have a great arsenal of weapons, some up to as many as 300 guns, which have been highlighted through the media. But do we think a violent terrorist with the objective of killing Jewish Australian cares whether he has a legal or an illegal gun? I would suggest they do not. Because a person who has such a radical and deadly imposition that they will access any gun they can to undertake their heinous and murderous work. The fact is, the murders committed 8 days ago by violent radical extremists were committed with a total of 4 guns, exactly what the Minns Labor government legislation supports in their bill today. In February this year, when the Liberal National Opposition introduced strong legislation to address disgraceful Nazi symbols being displayed, the following comments were made by various members of this place, and I will just state a few. The Leader of the House, Ron Honig, and the only Jewish member of this House, said, and I quote, "This problem does not require a political response. It requires bipartisan, unified response from both political parties to send out the message that anti-Semitic acts will not be tolerated by Parliament of New South Wales." Well, today, that very same person, the Leader of the House, Ron Honig, an only Jewish member of the House, used politics to prevent the Liberal National Opposition bill being debated. So he uses politics when it suits him and weasel words when real action is required. During this...
Yes, the member for Blue Mountains rises on point of order.
Point of order.
Could I ask that you direct the member to the substance of the bill rather than calling out particular individuals that, whether it's the Minister for Police or the Leader of Business in the House, who aren't here to defend themselves, to return to the substance of the bill?
Thank you, Member for Blue Mountains. It is member for Kellyville, just give me a moment. I would ask that you could be a little bit more cautious in targeting the individuals and deal more with the facts of the bill. But I do appreciate it's a very vexed area. There's a lot of emotion, and I'll call you back to the leave of the bill.
And Mr. Speaker, could I just request a short extension?
I will put the question. The question is that the member's time be extended. All of that opinion say aye. To the contrary, no. The member's time is extended.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I only call out those people who deserve to be called out by who are ultimately in government, who are making the decisions today in relation to this bill. They are the facts. That's why I've called them out. I'm not in any way attempting to call out people who have done something incorrectly, who have done something wrong outside. These people are the lawmakers in this government on behalf of the anti-Semitic rise and violence that we have seen committed against the Jewish Australian community, Mr. Speaker, and so I will leave my comments there, but ultimately they've been placed on the Hansard, and I'm very, very glad that they have been, because the Attorney-General has made similar remarks in relation to our bill, and yet today purports to bring into legislation into this House, which he believes will strengthen up and resolve the crimes that are currently being committed against Jewish Australians. I would not believe for one moment that this weak, lily-livered bill will do anything of the sort, because what is required, as I've said, Mr. Speaker, is decisive and tough action needs to be taken, and people can't take a backward step when that is required. Laws put in place to address crimes, whether that is hate speech, whether that is the displaying of Nazi symbols, whether that is anti-Semitism, whether that is protesting when there are illegal protests that have taken place, all need to be addressed with the full force of the law, tough law. And Mr. Speaker, I place this on the record. I very, very fortunately have in my background, having been a member of the previous government since 2011, put in place the legislation that provided a mandatory sentence for anyone who swung a wild, cowardly punch on the streets of Sydney. Mr. Speaker, that was the greatest scourge that we addressed when we came to government. The Liberal National came to government in 2011. Young people pre-fueling, getting full of grog, coming into the streets of Sydney, throwing their fists around and killing people. Some of those young people, Mr. Speaker, from my electorate, right, and knowing their families, I've got to tell you, taking the needless loss of life through those absolutely indiscriminate acts of violence, and they were addressed by putting in place a law to mandate a jail sentence of a minimum, I think of 8 to 10 years may have been the case. Mr. Speaker, that nipped it in the bud. I'll come back to the legislation, Mr. Speaker, and I'll finish off by saying this. Mr. Speaker, the objective of the Jewish faith is to provide for a peaceful world for everyone. And I witnessed that firsthand. As the Minister for Multiculturalism in the former Liberal National Government, in 2016, our then Premier, Mike Baird, was so moved by a 3-year-old child who was on the beach in Syria who had been killed. And that image, which went around the world, so affected the Premier, he decided to undertake to bring 5,000 Syrian refugees to New South Wales. That was above and beyond everything that the federal government did. The Premier was so moved, he brought those refugees to Australia. As the Minister for Multiculturalism, Mr. Speaker, I was invited to one of the synagogues in Wallara. And I was invited there, Mr. Speaker, to see the care and the education and support of those Syrian refugees by who? None other than Jewish Australian people at a synagogue in Wallara. I saw that firsthand. Dozens of them, Mr. Speaker, who were grasping our language, who were grasping the meaning of being an Australian, who were gaining opportunities in the workforce. Mr. Speaker, you look no further than the Jewish Australian community who like to try and improve, as their objective in life is, the lives of every person. And here they are, in fear of walking their streets, of sending their children to school unless they have armed guards and police. And Mr. Speaker, it is a disgrace what they have put up with, an absolute disgrace. It will not be addressed by this weak, lily-livered piece of legislation before this House. It needs some guts, it needs some real law and order to undertake and address the appropriate actions needed to address this crime and stamp out anti-Semitism once and for good in a great country that it has no place.
Thank the member for Kellyville, and I